And now for an expert's take on that corporate tax cut in India and trends that are leaving their mark on Asian economies. We have with us in the studio Harish Natarajan. He's head of economic risk analysis at AKE International. Harish, welcome. Good evening and good to see you.
Pleasure to be here.
Good to see you today. All right, so this tax rate now, this proposed slash, it's going to make India's corporate tax rate one of the lowest globally and certainly in line with what's being seen in Asia. How is it going to impact? Do you think it can bring in the foreign direct investment that the government wants to see?
Well, the tax rates and the tax change is certainly very interesting, coming at a time when the Indian economy has been slowing for 5 consecutive quarters. Growth in the last quarter was only 5%. And this has been a big blow to the Modi government. What is very notable about corporate tax rates, where the effective rate was almost as high as 35% until this change, is just how unfriendly India has been both to foreign investment and to major companies overall. On the positive side, there's probably going to be increased earnings and increased retained earnings by the part of companies. Maybe a few more foreign companies will enter the country. But in many ways, that doesn't entirely address the extent of the problems the Indian economy faces. If you look over the last year, growth of this quarter last year was about 8%. In the period, there are still serious issues with the banking and non-banking financial sector, where there has been incremental changes, including through the merger of banks. But without that kind of change, it is difficult to see how you can have increased corporate investment. But also consumption demand is weak. If you look at the automobile sector, year-on-year growth was a minus 41% in August. There's a lot more which needs to be done, though this is a very big step in the right direction, and perhaps a sign of what we'll see more from in the Modi government in the coming months and the coming year.
Yeah, certainly being seen as a bold decision, but perhaps not the only silver bullet that the Indian economy needs. What about for the rest of this region, though? Because we've seen a triple whammy of negative, geopolitical issues. We've got the Japan-South Korea trade spat. We've got the US-China trade tensions, as well as an expected spike in oil prices or changes to rise in oil prices. How do you think we're coping in Asia?
Well, if we start with Southeast Asia, growth in the last year was about 5%. It's probably going to slow to slightly below 4.5% this year. I think some of the geopolitical factors are to some degree overstated as whether they are the driving factor behind what is happening currently in Asia. It is true the trade war has been accelerating, but at the same time, the impact on Asia directly is fairly modest. The much bigger impact on Asia will be if the Chinese economy continues to slow. The trade war is probably taking 100, 200 basis points off Chinese growth, but probably not more than that. The bigger problems with the Chinese economy itself, slowing more rapidly, and the devaluation, the depreciation of the renminbi, which will have larger effects. And I think that is going to be one of the groundswell reasons why Southeast Asia and the rest of Asia is going to struggle. And I think the larger issue which Asia is facing right now is that there is going to be a global slowdown, and we're already seeing signs of that. And Asia's in a much weaker position now than it even was in 2008 and 2009 during the global financial crisis, in part because you don't have the compensating effect of a very rapidly growing China.
Right.
Oil prices certainly are not going to be a positive shock, but it's still worth knowing that even when they hit their peak on Monday, they were considerably lower than they were in October last year.
One very quick final question for you, Harish. You know a thing or two about AI. We understand that you once beat a computer in a debate with it. Where do you see AI in terms of being a game changer for Asia?
So by 2030, we're talking about AI contributing at least $15 trillion to global growth. So it's going to be gigantic. Particularly, I think we focus on China and we focus on the United States. But throughout the world, we're going to have to see more and more developments in other countries. I think Singapore is part of the vanguard, at least in small parts of AI. But we're seeing growth in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Thailand itself. And I think those ecosystems will not be as large as what we see in China or the United States, obviously, but they will be a contributor to growth. I think we need to see more active industrial policy to stimulate the growth of AI, particularly outside of Singapore.